Brandon Keller crossed the ballroom, took hold of Claire Whitmore's wheelchair, and shoved it out into the open floor where 400 people could see her. "Everybody look," he said loud enough to reach the orchestra. "Look at her. She came here to dance." He spun the chair once hard, so her hands slipped off the wheels. "Why would anyone waste a dance," he said, "on a girl who can't even stand up?" The music died. Nobody moved. Nobody helped her. And Claire sat there in the center of the most expensive room in Boston alone, while people she had known her whole life looked at their shoes. If this story reaches you, subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, because I want to see how far this story travels tonight. 4 hours before Brandon Keller put his hands on that wheelchair, Claire Whitmore was sitting in her bedroom on the 3rd floor of the Whitmore house telling her mother no. "I'm not going. Claire, I said no." Eleanor Whitmore stood in the doorway holding a garment bag against her chest like it weighed something. She had been standing there for 11 minutes. She had learned in 2 years that you did not walk into her daughter's room uninvited anymore. "It's one evening," Eleanor said. "It's one evening of 400 people deciding whether to look at me or not look at me. That's not an evening, Mom. That's a performance. Nobody's deciding anything. They decide the second I come through a door." Claire pushed a strand of hair off her face. "They do this thing. Have you noticed? They look. Then they catch themselves looking. Then they look at my face very hard, like my face is the most fascinating thing that's ever happened, because they're so afraid of looking down. Sweetheart." And then they smile too much. Claire's voice didn't rise. That was the worst part, Eleanor thought. It used to rise. "Everybody smiles at me like I'm 4 years old, and I just showed them a drawing." Eleanor came in and set the garment bag on the bed. She did not sit. Sitting made it a conversation, and conversations with Claire ended the same way lately, with a door and a silence behind it. "Your father wants you there." "My father wants a photograph," Claire said. "He wants one photograph of the family standing together so the board of his company can see that the Whitmores are fine. Everything is fine. The daughter is fine. Nothing happened. That's not fair." "Which part isn't fair?" Eleanor didn't answer that, because the honest answer was none of it, and the true answer was all of it. Claire looked at the garment bag for a long time. "What color is it?" she finally said. "Ivory." "Of course it is. You used to love ivory." "I used to love a lot of things," Claire said. "I used to love the sound of a floor. Did you know that a wood floor has a sound? Every studio has a different one. You come in early before anybody, and you put your feet down, and you can hear how the whole day's going to go." Eleanor's throat moved. "Claire, I'm not being dramatic. I'm telling you a true thing." Claire finally looked up. "Nobody asks me true things anymore. They ask me how I'm feeling. That's not the same question." "Then tell me a true thing." "I'm scared of that room," Claire said. "That's the true thing. I'm 18 years old and I'm scared of a room." The clock in the hallway ticked. Somewhere below them, a car door shut. "Then be scared in the ivory one," Eleanor said quietly, "instead of scared in this one." And that was how Claire Whitmore ended up in the back of a car at 7:40 in the evening, on the coldest night of the winter, wearing a dress she used to love on her way to the Whitmore Estate Winter Charity Ball, with her hands folded in her lap so nobody could see them shaking. Richard Whitmore had gone ahead an hour earlier. He had a speech. The estate had a service ramp now. It had been installed 20 months ago in 11 days by a company Richard flew in from Chicago, because the local contractor said 6 weeks. That was the kind of thing Richard Whitmore did. He solved. He had solved supply chains. He had solved 3 failing companies. He had solved a housing crisis in 2 counties. And when the doctors at Mass General had used a certain sentence about his daughter, he had simply refused to accept the sentence, the way a man refuses a bad contract, and he had flown her to Cleveland, to Baltimore, to Zurich, to a clinic in Barcelona that cost more per week than a house, and every single one of them had used the same sentence: "She will never walk again." Richard had never once said that sentence out loud, not one time in 2 years. His wife had noticed. His daughter had noticed. Everyone had noticed. The car came up the drive at 7:55. Through the window, Claire could see the whole front of the house lit up gold and people going in and the small white puffs of their breath, and she felt her stomach turn over. "We can go home," Eleanor said. No, we can't. We can. I'll tell your father you were tired. Mom. Claire watched the doors. If I turn around now, I will never come out of that house again. I know myself. I'll be 40 years old up there on the 3rd floor telling somebody's grandchildren about the time I used to dance. Eleanor put her hand over her mouth for a second. Okay, she said. Okay. The driver brought the chair around. The cold got in under the wool blanket immediately straight through the ivory dress, and Claire hated the blanket, hated it more than she hated the chair, because a blanket meant an old woman on a porch, a blanket meant waiting for something to be over. She folded it and left it on the seat. You'll freeze, Eleanor said. It's 40 feet. She rolled herself. That was a rule. Nobody pushed her. Nobody had pushed her in 2 years, not since the 4th week of rehab, when an aide had grabbed her handles without asking, and Claire had felt something inside her chest go white-hot in a way she still could not explain to anybody. Ask me. That's all. Ask me first. The doors opened, the warmth came out, the noise came out. 400 voices, an orchestra tuning glass and silver and money, and Claire Whitmore rolled into it with her chin up, and the first thing that happened was exactly what she said would happen. A woman named Patricia Dean looked at her, caught herself looking, and smiled too much. Claire, look at you. Hi, Mrs. Dean. You look wonderful. Doesn't she look wonderful? Patricia said this to the air, to nobody, to the room. So brave. There it was. 11 seconds. Claire counted. 11 seconds in the building before somebody called her brave for existing in a dress. Thank you, Claire said. So brave, Patricia said again, and squeezed Claire's shoulder and moved away and never once looked below Claire's collarbone, not once the entire time. Across the room near the kitchen entrance, a boy in a white service jacket stood holding a tray of champagne and watched the whole thing. He did not smile too much. He did not look away, either. He looked at her the way you look at a person. Nobody noticed him. Nobody ever did. His name was Ethan Brooks, and by the end of that night, 400 people would know it. The first hour was survivable. That was the word Claire used in her head. Survivable. She found a place near the edge of the floor where the traffic was thin, and she made herself stay there instead of hiding in the coat room. And she talked to people, and people talked at her. And there is a difference between those two things that nobody understands until they're in a chair at a party. Claire, sweetheart, how are you feeling? Fine, thank you. You know my cousin's boy had a back thing. He does yoga now. Have you tried yoga? I haven't. You should try yoga. I'll think about it. Claire, look at you. Are they still doing the therapy? Twice a week. That's wonderful. That's just wonderful. My goodness, aren't you brave? 6 times. She counted that, too. 6 people used the word brave before 9 o'clock, and not one of them asked her a single question about her actual life. Not one asked what she was reading. Not one asked if she was applying anywhere. Not one asked what she thought about anything. She was a subject. She was a topic. She was the thing people mentioned to prove they were good. Her father found her at 9. There she is, Richard said. He bent and kissed the top of her head, and she felt the whole room register at the billionaire and his daughter, the photograph he came for. You came. I came. Good. That's good, Claire. He straightened his cuffs. Bill Hargrove's here. He asked about you. Did he? He asked how you were doing. And what did you tell him? Richard paused. It was a half second. She caught it anyway. She caught everything now. That was what 2 years in a chair did to you. It made you an expert on the half second. I told him you were doing great, he said. Right. You are doing great. Dad. She looked up at him. Say the word. What word? You know what word. Richard's jaw set. I'm not going to do this here. You've never done it anywhere. That's my point. 2 years. You've never said it once. Not to me, not to Mom, not to the doctors. You just book another flight. Because I'm not accepting. I know you're not accepting it. Her voice cracked, and she hated that. I know. And every time you don't accept it, do you know what I hear? I hear that the version of me sitting right here isn't good enough for you. That you're going to keep looking for a different daughter until somebody finds one. Richard Whitmore stood very still. That's not, he said. Claire, that is not Mr. Whitmore. A man in a gray suit had appeared at his elbow. Sorry to interrupt. The senator's asking for you before the remarks. Richard looked at his daughter. He looked at the man in the gray suit. And Claire watched her father do the thing her father always did, the thing he could not help, the thing that had built an empire and hollowed out a family. He said, "Give me 2 minutes." And then he gave her one, and then he was gone. She sat there in the ivory dress and thought I should have stayed on the 3rd floor. At 9:20, the orchestra changed tempo, and the dancing started. Claire had known it was coming. She had told herself she would be fine. She had rehearsed it actually out loud in her room like a fool. "I'll just watch. Watching is fine. It's just a song." And then the first bars came up out of the strings, and her body betrayed her completely, because her body remembered. Her right hand lifted off the armrest by itself. 2 inches. Just 2. The old opening, the one her instructor used to make her hold for a full 8 count until her shoulder burned. She put it down fast. She looked around to see if anyone saw. Somebody had. Across the floor near the kitchen doors, a boy with a serving tray was looking directly at her right hand. Claire felt her face go hot and turned away. She would think about that later. She would think about it for years, actually. That out of 400 people, the only one watching her hand was the one nobody in that room could have named. Her friend Sydney found her at 9:30 and said the thing that started it. "Claire, okay, don't be mad. That's a great opener. There's a whole group of guys over there, and I told them, Sydney, I told them somebody should ask you to dance." Claire closed her eyes. "Why would you do that?" "Because it's stupid. You're the prettiest girl in this room, and you're sitting here like what?" Sydney stopped. "Say it," Claire said. "I didn't mean—" "No, say it. I want to hear how it ends. Sitting here like what?" Sydney's eyes filled. "Like you already left," she whispered. And that landed harder than anything Brandon Keller would say all night, because it was true, and because Sydney was the only person in the building who loved her enough to say a true thing, and because Claire had no answer for it. "They're coming over," Sydney said. "Oh, God. It's fine. It's fine. They're nice. It's—" The first one was Cole Bannister. 20 years old, hockey shoulders, a smile his mother had paid a great deal for. He came over with 2 of his friends hanging back at a distance that made everything obvious. "Hey, Claire, right? You've known me since I was 6, Cole." Right, yeah," he laughed. "So, this is a good song." "It is. Yeah." Silence. "Cole," Claire said, "you can just go." No, I'd love to, but I'm actually waiting for someone. She's coming back from she went to the anyway. Rain check." "Sure." Cool. Great seeing you." He was gone in 4 seconds. His friends absorbed him back into the group, and Claire heard distinctly one of them say, "Oh my God, dude," and then laughter quickly muffled. Number 1. The second one was Marcus Hale. Marcus had the decency to look miserable about it. "Claire, hey, listen, I would, but my ankle's been—" He gestured vaguely at his own leg, at his perfectly functional leg, in front of a girl in a wheelchair, and then heard himself do it, and his whole face collapsed. "Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's fine. That was such a—" "Marcus, it's fine. Go." He went. Number 2. The third one didn't even come over. He looked at her from 12 feet away, and Claire watched him make the calculation. Watched the arithmetic happen behind his eyes. How it would look, what people would think, whether he'd be trapped there for the whole song, whether somebody would film it. And then he turned around and asked Ashley Combs instead, and Ashley said yes, and they were dancing 8 seconds later, and Claire had to sit and watch them do it. Number 3. By 10 o'clock it was 6. 6 young men had refused to dance with Claire Whitmore, and every single one of them had a reason, and not one of the reasons was true, and every person in that ballroom knew it. Sydney was crying quietly at the drinks table where she thought nobody could see her. Eleanor Whitmore had a hand on the back of a chair and was gripping it hard enough that her rings had turned her fingers white. Richard Whitmore was across the room with his back turned, talking to a senator laughing at something. And Claire sat in the center edge of that gold room in an ivory dress and understood something with total clarity for the first time in 2 years. They weren't afraid of her chair. They were afraid of being seen with her chair. She wasn't a person to these people. She was a liability. She was what happened when the world stopped being polite to you. Near the kitchen doors, the boy with the tray had stopped moving. He'd been standing there for 90 seconds without serving anybody. His supervisor snapped fingers at him twice. He didn't hear it. Ethan Brooks was counting too. 6. He'd counted every one of them. And then Brandon Keller arrived, and everything that had been quiet cruelty turned loud. He came in from the terrace at 10 past 10 with his jacket open and his tie loose and 4 friends behind him, and Claire's whole body went cold the second she heard his laugh. Because you don't forget a laugh. You don't forget the laugh of a boy who told you he loved you on a dock in July when you were 16, Brandon Keller, son of Senator Whit Keller, 20 years old. The boy who sat in the hospital hallway in Boston for exactly 1 afternoon and never came back. Not once, not a call. Not a text. 23 months of nothing, and then he'd shown up at a Christmas party last year and walked past her chair like it was furniture. Sydney saw him first. Claire, we're leaving, right now. Let's go get coffee, Sit down, Sid. Claire, if I run, he wins. Brandon spotted her. She watched him spot her. She watched his face do something ugly and amused, and she watched him say something to his friends without taking his eyes off her. And one of them laughed, and one of them didn't. And the one who didn't looked at the floor. He came over. Claire Whitmore. Brandon. Wow. He put his hands in his pockets and rocked back on his heels. You came out. That's good for you, seriously. Thank you. How's the, He nodded at the chair. How's everything? Everything's fine. Good. He looked around at his friends and then back at her and smiled. And Claire knew that smile. She had loved that smile once. And now it made her want to put her hands over her face. Hey, so I heard the guys were being kind of weird about the dancing thing. Sydney stood up. Brandon, I'm talking to her? Brandon, I swear to God. Sit down, Sydney. Don't talk to her like that, Claire said. And Brandon Keller's smile changed. It got thinner. Because that was the thing about Brandon. He could handle her being sad. He could handle her being broken. What he could not handle, what he had never once been able to handle, was her being unimpressed. You know what your problem is, he said. I have a feeling I'm about to. Everybody's supposed to feel bad for you now, right? That's the deal. 2 years, everybody tiptoes. Everybody says, poor Claire, everybody has to be so careful. He leaned down, but nobody's allowed to say the actual thing. And what's the actual thing, Brandon? He said it. He said it loudly, and he said it to the room, not to her, and that was the part that would live on the internet for the next 6 years. Why would anyone waste a dance on someone who can't even stand? The orchestra didn't stop. That's what people always get wrong when they tell this story. The orchestra kept playing. The music just kept going cheerful and gold over 400 people who had all gone completely silent. A woman gasped somewhere by the windows, and it sounded like a dish breaking. Nobody said anything. Nobody. Eleanor Whitmore took one step, and a man named Charles Dean put a hand on her arm and said quietly, Eleanor, don't make it a scene. And Eleanor Whitmore would remember that hand on her arm until the day she died. Richard Whitmore across the ballroom did not turn around. He didn't hear it. He was laughing at a senator's joke about the Bruins. Sydney was making a sound like she couldn't breathe, and Claire sat there. She sat there with 400 people looking at her, and not one person moving, and the strings kept going, and she felt the tears come up, and she fought them, and she lost, and the first one went down her cheek, and she couldn't wipe it, because wiping it would prove it was there. Brandon straightened up. He was already regretting it. She saw that too. She saw the exact half-second where his brain caught up with his mouth. But he was 20 years old, and his friends were watching, so he did the thing. He grabbed her handles. Come on, let's give everybody a good look. Don't touch me. He shoved the chair forward, out, into the open floor. Her hands slipped off the wheels, and she grabbed for them and missed, and the chair rolled 6 feet on its own and stopped in the exact center of the dance floor with the light coming straight down. There, Brandon said. Front and center. That's what she wanted, right? Somebody said, Brandon, come on. That was it. That was the entire resistance of the wealthiest room in Massachusetts. Brandon, come on. Claire Whitmore sat alone in the middle of the floor. She could not get her hands to work. That was the thing nobody understood. Her arms were fine. Her arms were strong. She could do 20 minutes on the ergometer, but she was shaking so hard that her palms kept sliding off the rims, and every failed push was another second in the light, and she couldn't move, and 400 people watched her, not be able to move. 2 years of therapy. 2 years of, "I'm fine, thank you, so brave, have you tried yoga?" And she was going to die right here in this dress. Then she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Metal on marble. Clean and flat and loud in the silence. Somebody had set a tray down on the floor. Every head in that ballroom turned toward the kitchen doors. The boy in the white service jacket stepped over the tray and started walking. Claire lifted her head. He wasn't hurrying. That was the first thing she noticed through the blur. He wasn't rushing over to save her, wasn't running, wasn't doing the thing people do when they want to be seen doing a thing. He just walked straight across 100 feet of dance floor, past the senator's son and the deans and the Hargroves and every single person who hadn't moved. Brandon turned. "Whoa, hey, where do you think you're going?" The boy didn't stop. "Hey, kitchen, I'm talking to you." The boy didn't stop. Brandon's friend grabbed his sleeve and said, "Dude, leave it." And Brandon shook him off and stepped directly into the boy's path. "I said, where do you think you're going?" And the boy in the white jacket stopped finally and looked up at Brandon Keller. And when he spoke, his voice was so quiet that people at the back of the room had to lean in to hear it. "Move." Somebody actually laughed, nervously. Once. Brandon blinked. "Excuse me." "You're standing in front of her," the boy said. "Move." "Do you know who my father is?" "No." Brandon's mouth opened. "I don't know who your father is," the boy said, "and I don't know who you are, and neither of those things is my problem tonight. She's been sitting there for 4 minutes. Somebody should have crossed this room 3 minutes and 50 seconds ago." He looked briefly at the entire ballroom, at the deans, at Sydney, at Patricia, who had called her brave 11 seconds after she came through the door. "Any of you, all of you." Nobody said a word. "Get back in the kitchen," Brandon said, "before I have you fired." "Okay," the boy said. And then he walked around him. He walked around Brandon Keller like Brandon Keller was a chair, and he crossed the last 20 feet, and he did not stand over Claire Whitmore, and he did not put a hand on her chair. He knelt down, all the way down on one knee on the marble in a white service jacket, until his eyes were below hers, and she had to look down to see him. Nobody had been below her eye level in 2 years. "Hi," he said. Claire couldn't speak. "My name's Ethan Brooks." She got out one word. "Don't." "Don't what?" "Don't be nice to me right now." Her voice broke all the way open. "Please, I can do this. I can do all of it. I can do the whole night. I just can't do somebody being nice to me in front of them." Ethan Brooks nodded slowly, like that was the most reasonable thing anyone had ever said. "Okay," he said. "Then I won't be nice to you." And he said the next thing quietly enough that only she heard it, and Claire Whitmore's head came up so fast that 400 people saw her face change. "Your right hand went up during the first song," Ethan said. 2 inches, and your left foot moved with it. Claire stopped breathing. "Your left foot," he said, "moved." "That's not possible," she whispered. "I know," Ethan Brooks said. "That's what I've been trying to tell somebody for 3 months. Claire Whitmore heard the words, and her whole body went still in a way it had not gone still in 2 years. "Say it again." "Your left foot moved," Ethan said. "That's not no. Do you know what you're saying to me right now?" "I know exactly what I'm saying to you." "You don't." Her voice was shaking. "You don't, because if you did, you wouldn't say it in a room full of people who've been waiting 2 years for me to embarrass myself." Ethan didn't move. He stayed down on that one knee on the marble, with his eyes below hers, and he said, "Then tell me to stop and I'll stop." Claire opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Because underneath the humiliation and the tears and the 400 faces, a thing had just happened inside her chest that she had spent 23 months killing, burying, salting the ground over, and it had come back up through the floor of her like a hand. Hope. And she hated it. She hated it more than she had ever hated Brandon Keller. "You're a waiter," she said. "Yes. You're a waiter, and I've had 11 specialists." 12, Ethan said. Claire's head came up. Boston, Cleveland, Baltimore, 2 in New York, Zurich, Barcelona. He said it flat, like reading a list, not like a trick. Barcelona was 14 months ago. You were there 9 days. The blood went out of her face. How do you know that? And that was the exact moment Brandon Keller decided he was still in this. Okay, that's enough. He grabbed the back of Ethan's collar. That's everybody here that he knows her medical history. This guy's a stalker. This guy is literally a stalker. Ethan came up out of the kneel without being pulled, which somehow made it worse for Brandon because there was no struggle in it. He just stood, and Brandon's hand slid off him. Take your hand off me, Ethan said. Or what? Nothing, Ethan said. That's not a threat. It's a request. I'm asking you to take your hand off me. You hear this? Brandon turned to the room. You hear him? Where's security? Somebody get security. This is a private event. And here is the thing that Claire Whitmore would think about for the rest of her life. The room moved. For 6 minutes, the wealthiest people in Massachusetts had watched a girl cry alone in the center of a dance floor, and not one of them had crossed the marble. And now, 3 men were coming fast, sleeves down, hands out, because a boy in a service jacket had said the word Barcelona. They found their courage the second it got cheap. Stop, Claire said. Nobody heard her. Sir, let's step outside. I'm not going outside. Sir, stop. Claire Whitmore's voice went up and hit the ceiling of that ballroom and came back down on 400 people like a plate hitting a floor, and everything stopped. At 10:19 on the night of the Whitmore Winter Charity Ball, everybody in that room finally looked at her, not at the chair, at her. Nobody touches him, Claire said. The security man hesitated. Miss Whitmore, this is my mother's house. My name is on the invitation. Nobody touches him. He's harassing. He's the only person in this building who said a single true thing to me all night. She was breathing hard. 6 guys wouldn't dance with me. 6. And you didn't come. My father's 40 feet away, and he didn't come. 400 people watched Brandon Keller shove my chair into the middle of the floor, and not one of you moved, and now you want to save me from a waiter? Silence. Get away from him, Claire said. They got away from him. And Brandon Keller stood there in the middle of it with his tie loose and his friends behind him, and understood dimly for the first time all night that something had shifted, and he did what men like Brandon Keller always do when the ground moves. He got louder. You know what? Fine. Let him have his moment. He clapped his hands twice slow. Let's see it. Come on, Big Speech Kitchen. Tell us all about her foot. Brandon, Sydney said. Stop. Tell us how the busboy figured out what Zurich couldn't. Brandon, stop it. No, I want to hear it. He spread his arms. Because either he's lying to her, which is disgusting, or he's telling the truth, which means the entire medical profession is stupid, and a guy who carries plates is a genius. So which is it, Kitchen? Which one are you? And Ethan Brooks looked at him and said quietly, I'm the first one who watched her. The room made a sound, not a gasp, something lower. What does that mean? It means nobody watched her. Ethan turned, and he was not talking to Brandon anymore, and that was somehow much worse. 12 specialists, 2 years, every one of them measured her. Reflex hammer pinprick scale of 1 to 5 chart sign next patient. 22 minutes on average. I checked. 22 minutes. He looked at Patricia Dean, at the Hargroves, at every person who had called her brave. I've watched her 3 days a week for 3 months. That's about 140 hours. So when I tell you her left foot moved during the first song, I'm not smarter than Zurich. He paused. I just looked longer. Nobody said anything. Then a voice came from the crowd, an older voice, and it did not sound amused at all. What did you see? Everyone turned. Dr. Alan Reese was 71 years old and had been the Whitmore family physician since before Claire was born, and he had said the sentence himself in a hallway 23 months ago with his hand on Richard Whitmore's shoulder. He had said, she will never walk again, and then he had gone home and sat in his car in his own driveway for 40 minutes. Alan, someone murmured, don't encourage this. Reese didn't look away from Ethan. I asked you a question, son. What did you see? Her left foot, Ethan said. Second bar of the first song. Her right hand lifted 2 inches, and her left foot rotated maybe 15 degrees. Outward. And then she put her hand down, and it stopped. Spasm, Reese said. It was in time. The old man went very quiet. Say that again. It was in time with the music, Ethan said. Spasms don't have rhythm. Dr. Alan Reese did not move for 4 full seconds. And then he took his glasses off, which everybody in the Whitmore family knew meant something, and he said in a completely different voice, "Get her father." At 10:24, Richard Whitmore was standing in the east corner of his own ballroom with a drink he wasn't drinking, laughing at a story Senator Whit Keller had told him twice before when a man in a gray suit leaned in and said 6 words. "Sir, there's a situation with Claire." He was moving before the sentence finished. He came through that crowd like weather. People got out of the way. He was not a large man, but he had spent 30 years walking into rooms and having them rearrange themselves, and when he broke through the front row and saw his daughter in the middle of the dance floor with her face wet and a boy in a service jacket standing over her, everything in Richard Whitmore's head went white. "Get away from my daughter! Dad, I said get away from her!" He was on Ethan in 3 steps. "Who are you? Who the hell are you? Dad, listen to me. Alan, what is this? What's happening?" And Dr. Alan Reese said, "Richard, be quiet a moment." Richard Whitmore turned to look at him like he'd been slapped. "Excuse me?" "I said be quiet." Reese had his glasses in his hand. "The boy said something, and I want to hear the rest of it." "He's a waiter, Alan." "Yes. He's a child in a jacket." "Richard!" The old man's voice cracked like a door slamming. "In 2 years, I have been wrong about your daughter 1 time or 100 times, and I don't know which. So let me hear the rest of it." The Winter Charity Ball had 412 guests that night. Not one of them was talking. Richard Whitmore stood in the middle of his own floor, breathing hard, and looked at his daughter's face. And Claire said the thing that ended him. "Dad." He looked at me. Richard's mouth opened. 2 years, she said. Everybody looked for something. Nobody looked at me. Richard Whitmore, who had never once said the sentence out loud, made a small sound. Then he turned to the boy in the white jacket and said in a voice nobody in that room had ever heard him use, "Say it to me." "Sir, whatever you said to her, say it to me." "Her left foot moved in time with the music," Ethan said. "Which means the signal's getting through. Which means the pathway isn't dead. Which means somewhere in the last 2 years, somebody stopped looking for the road and started building around the hole." Richard Whitmore stared at him. "Who are you?" he said. And Ethan Brooks said, "Nobody. I'm nobody," which was not true. But it was what he had been told in 100 ways by 100 people for 11 years, and at some point a person just starts saying it back. 3 months earlier, Ethan Brooks had walked up the front steps of Ravenswood Academy with 1 backpack, 1 notebook, and a photograph in a plastic sleeve, and the woman at the front desk had looked at him for a second and a half too long, and then said, "Deliveries are around the side, honey." "I'm a student." "Oh." Pause. "Oh, of course you are. Name, Ethan Brooks." She scrolled. She scrolled again. She scrolled a 3rd time, and then her face did a thing. "Oh, you're the..." She stopped herself. "You're the Hargrove Scholar." "I don't know what that is." It's wonderful, honey. It's a wonderful program." She smiled too much. "Someone will be so glad to meet you." Nobody was glad to meet him. The scholarship covered tuition books and lunch, and it required him to work 15 hours a week in the dining hall and at school functions, which meant that by the 2nd week, the boys in his own chemistry section had watched him wipe their table. There is a specific thing that happens to a 17-year-old boy's face when he has to hand a napkin to a classmate. Ethan learned to make his face do nothing at all. They called him the ghost. He knew that. He'd heard it in the hallway. He'd heard worse. He didn't complain, and it wasn't because he was noble. It was because he had done the arithmetic. He had 11 years of practice at arithmetic like that. You get 1 thing per year, more or less, and you can either spend it on being angry or spend it on getting out. And Ethan Brooks had decided at 9 years old, sitting on a plastic chair outside a social worker's office, that he was never spending another dollar on being angry. His mother's name was Diane. That's the part nobody at Ravenswood knew, because nobody at Ravenswood ever asked him a single question about himself, not one in 3 months. Nobody said, "Where are you from?" Nobody said, "Do you have family?" He was a category. He was the scholarship. He was what happened when the school needed a photograph for the brochure. They didn't know he had been 7 years old, sitting on a rehab clinic floor doing homework at his mother's feet, while she coaxed a 9-year-old boy with a shattered pelvis into moving a single toe. They didn't know he'd grown up watching her do the thing that nobody else could do, which was not medicine exactly. It was attention. "Look at him, Ethan," she used to say. "Don't look at the chart. The chart is what somebody else already thought. Look at him. He's not moving." He moved. When his mom came through the door, Diane Brooks would sit back on her heels. "Watch what a body does when it wants something. That's where the door is. Everything else is a wall." She died when he was 11. Aneurysm. 41 years old at a red light on a Tuesday, and the world simply closed over the place where she'd been, and there was no father, and there were no grandparents, and there was a woman with a clipboard who kept saying, "I know, sweetheart, I know," and then there was a bed in a room with 3 other beds. He kept the photograph. He kept the notebook, too, which was hers, and which had 400 pages of her handwriting in it, and which he had read so many times by the age of 17 that he could tell you what was on page 206. On page 206, she had written, "They stop trying when we stop looking," not the other way around. The first time Ethan Brooks saw Claire Whitmore, it was a Tuesday in September, and she was in the Ravenswood Library, and a boy had moved a chair for her. That was all. He'd moved a chair. And Ethan watched Claire Whitmore say thank you with a smile that had absolutely nothing behind it, and then he watched her sit there for 1 hour and 40 minutes and never turn a page. He noticed it because his mother had trained him to notice it. A body that isn't doing anything is still telling you something. He asked a kid at the next table who she was. "That's Whitmore." "Whitmore what?" The kid actually laughed. "Dude, Whitmore, like the building you're standing in, her family. What happened to her?" "Horse thing. Couple years ago." The kid shrugged. "She's paralyzed. It's sad." And then the kid went back to his laptop, and that was the entire conversation. And Ethan Brooks sat there and thought, everybody in this school knows the last 4 words of her story, and nobody knows anything else. He should have let it go. He knew that even then. He knew what he was: the ghost, the scholarship, the kid who wiped tables, and he knew exactly how it would sound if he ever opened his mouth. He knew it so well that he waited 3 months to open it. But he was Diane Brooks's son, and Diane Brooks's son could not watch a body that badly and not look. So he looked. He worked the Thursday therapy sessions in the Ravenswood Wellness Annex because the school rented the room out to a rehab group, and somebody had to set up chairs and wipe down mats, and nobody notices the boy wiping the mats. He was in that room 3 days a week for 3 months. And what he saw made him sick. Not because they were cruel. That was the thing he could never make anybody understand later. They weren't cruel. They were nice. They were so, so nice. "Okay, Claire, let's just do what we can today." "Don't push it, sweetheart." "That's great. That's really great. Let's stop there." 12 weeks. He wrote it in the notebook on the blank pages in the back under his mother's handwriting. 12 weeks of don't push it. 12 weeks of a girl being handled. They loaded her, they measured her, they adjusted her, and they never once asked her to want anything. And Ethan Brooks sat on the floor with a wet rag in his hand and heard his mother's voice so loudly he thought people would turn around. Watch what a body does when it wants something. Nobody had asked Claire Whitmore to want anything in 2 years. They'd asked her to accept. They'd asked her to adjust. They'd asked her to be brave, which is a word people use when they've decided nothing is ever going to change. On the 4th Thursday, he saw it for the first time. The therapist had put on a radio. It wasn't for Claire. It was for the therapist, some station out of Cambridge. And a song came on with strings in it, and Claire Whitmore lying flat on a mat being moved through a passive range like a piece of furniture went absolutely still, and her left foot rotated 15 degrees, outward, on the beat. Ethan dropped the rag. "Did you see that?" The therapist looked up. "See what?" "Her foot." "Sorry, are you talking to me?" "Her left foot just moved." The therapist smiled. She was a perfectly good person. She had a family. "Honey, that's a spasm. That happens all day." It was on the beat. "Okay," she said, and turned back around, and that was the end of it, and she never thought about it again for 1 second in her entire life. That night, Ethan Brooks stayed up until 4 in the morning with a library card, 3 medical databases, and his mother's notebook open on the desk beside him. He learned what he was looking at. He learned that there was a word for a spinal cord injury where the connection isn't severed but suppressed, where the tissue swells and compresses and the body in a kind of blind panic shuts down the whole road rather than admit that part of it still works. He learned that the first 6 weeks were everything, and that Claire Whitmore had spent those 6 weeks in 3 different hospitals in 2 countries while her father chased better answers instead of earlier ones. He learned that after a certain amount of time the muscles stop asking, not because they can't, because nobody's called. He learned that the tests they'd run on her were the right tests and the readings were the right readings, and every single doctor had been completely correct about what they measured. They just hadn't measured her at 4 in the afternoon with a string section playing. Because that was the whole thing. That was the entire thing. And Ethan Brooks sat in a dark study room at Ravenswood Academy at 4 in the morning with his mother's handwriting under his hand and understood it all at once. Claire Whitmore's body still answered to one thing. Nobody had played music at her in 2 years. He tried to tell someone. That's the part that would come out later in the hearings and the depositions and the piece in the Globe, and it's the part that made people so angry they wrote letters. He tried 5 times. He told the therapist. She said spasm. He wrote a letter to the rehab group's clinical director. It came back with a form response and a line at the bottom that said, "We appreciate your interest in the field." He went to the Ravenswood school nurse, who was kind and who listened for 11 minutes and who said, "Ethan, honey, I understand you want to help, but you have to understand how this sounds." "How does it sound?" "It sounds like a boy with a crush," she said gently, telling a family of doctors they're wrong. He tried to reach Dr. Alan Reese's office. He got a receptionist. She was polite. She asked for his credentials. He said he was a student. She asked what program. He said Ravenswood Academy. There was a pause, and then she said, "The high school." He said yes. She said someone would call him back, and nobody ever called him back. And Ethan Brooks sat on his bed in a dormitory full of boys who thought his name was Ghost and understood the shape of his life with total clarity. He was right, and nobody was ever going to hear him, because being right is worth nothing at all if you're nobody. The 5th time he did the thing he swore he would never do. He waited for her after a session in the annex hallway. Miss Whitmore. She'd looked up, not annoyed, just tired the way she was always tired. "Hi. I set up the mats in there, on Thursdays." "Okay." And he had it right there, 4 seconds of a hallway, and a girl looking at him. Everything he'd found, everything he'd stayed up 400 hours for, and he opened his mouth. And he could not do it, because he saw it. He saw exactly what it would look like. The orphan, the busboy, the ghost kneeling in a hallway, telling the richest girl in Massachusetts that the 11 doctors her father flew across an ocean had all missed something, and he saw her face do the thing all their faces did, the pity, the embarrassment, the "oh, honey," and he could not survive being one more person who came at Claire Whitmore with a story about how she might be fixable. "Never mind," he said. "Have a good night." "You too." And he went back to the kitchen, and he hated himself in a way that had no bottom to it, and that was 3 weeks before the winter charity ball. 3 weeks before he stood by a service door with a tray of champagne and watched 6 young men refuse a girl. 3 weeks before he counted every one. 3 weeks before a boy in a good jacket said, "Why would anyone waste a dance on someone who can't even stand?" And Ethan Brooks discovered that there is a particular sound a room makes when 400 people decide together to do nothing. He'd heard it before. He'd heard it his whole life. He set down the tray. At 10:29 in the middle of the Whitmore ballroom, Richard Whitmore said, "Nobody is nobody. Give me a name." "Ethan Brooks, sir." "Brooks." Richard turned. "Alan." "It's not a name I know," Reese said slowly. "Should it be?" "I don't know. Should it?" And nobody in that room noticed the woman standing near the 3rd window, 64 years old, in a green dress, who had gone completely white. Her name was Margaret Vance, and she had run the pediatric rehabilitation floor at Boston General for 19 years, and she had come to this ball because her nephew made her, and she had not made a sound in 6 minutes. She was looking at the photograph. Because when Ethan Brooks had come up off that kneel, the chain around his neck had swung out of his collar, and the small plastic sleeve on the end of it had turned in the light, and Margaret Vance had seen a face she had not seen in 11 years. "Oh my God," she said. Nobody heard her. "Excuse me," she said louder and started pushing through the crowd. Excuse me, please move." "Ma'am, move." Margaret Vance came out of that crowd and stopped 6 feet from a boy in a service jacket and said one word, "Diane." And Ethan Brooks turned around so fast that Claire heard the breath go out of him. "What did you say at that photograph?" Margaret Vance's hand was over her mouth. "Around your neck. Let me see it. Let me see it, please." He put his hand over it. It was the first defensive thing he had done all night. "Please," she said. I'm sorry. I know how this looks. Please." Ethan pulled the chain out and held it up. Margaret Vance looked at the photograph of a woman in scrubs with a 9-year-old boy on her hip, and she made a sound like she'd been hit, and then she said, "You're Diane Brooks's boy." The ballroom went absolutely silent. "You're Diane's boy," she said again, and then she turned around and she was crying, and she said it to the whole room, to 400 of the wealthiest people in Massachusetts, and her voice broke on every third word. "That's Diane Brooks's son." "Margaret," someone said. "Who?" And Margaret Vance laughed horribly. "Who?" She wiped her face. "Who? You want to know who?" She pointed at Dr. Alan Reese. "Ask him," she said. "Ask Alan Reese who Diane Brooks was." Every head in that room turned, and the old man standing in the middle of the dance floor with his glasses in his hand had gone the color of paper. "Alan," Richard Whitmore said. "Alan, who is Diane Brooks?" Dr. Alan Reese didn't answer. He was looking at the boy. "Alan." "She was the best I ever saw," Reese said. Richard stared at him. "What?" "She was the best I ever saw," Reese said again, and his voice did something no one in the Whitmore family had ever heard it do. In 43 years, she wasn't a physician, she was a therapist. She worked on the pediatric floor at Boston General, and she took the cases nobody else would sign for, and I watched that woman walk children out of that building that I had personally written off. Personally, with my own hand, on a chart. The room did not breathe. "There was a boy in 99, Reese said, 6 years old, T11 burst fracture. I told his mother the same sentence I've told every mother for 40 years. Diane Brooks worked on him for 14 months. He played high school baseball." Reese finally looked at Richard Whitmore. "I called her Richard." Richard's face changed. "What?" 23 months ago. The old man's voice was almost gone. The week of Claire's accident. I picked up the phone in that hallway, and I called Boston General, and I asked for Diane Brooks, because she was the one person on this earth I would have handed your daughter to. "Alan, what are you telling me?" "They told me she died," Reese said, 11 years ago. And then Dr. Alan Reese looked at the 17-year-old boy in the white service jacket standing in the middle of the Whitmore ballroom, and he asked the question that turned that entire room upside down. "Son," he said, "who taught you what you know?" Ethan Brooks looked back at him. "She did," he said. "She taught me everything she knew before she died. I was 11. Reese's hand came up over his mouth. "You have her notes," he said. It wasn't a question. Ethan didn't answer. "You have her notes," Reese said again louder, and he was crossing the floor now, this 71-year-old man who had not hurried anywhere in a decade. "Boy, listen to me. Do you have her notes?" And Ethan Brooks said 400 pages. Somebody in that ballroom dropped a glass, and it shattered, and not one person turned to look. Dr. Alan Reese did not wait for the glass to stop ringing on the marble. "Where are they, sir?" "The notes, son. Where are they? Are they in a box somewhere in a storage unit? Did somebody throw them out?" The old man's hands were actually shaking. "Tell me somebody didn't throw them out." "They're in my room." "Your room where?" "Ravenswood, Dormitory C." Dr. Alan Reese put a hand on his own chest. "You're telling me He said that 400 pages of Diane Brooks's clinical notes have been sitting in a boarding school dorm room for 3 months. 11 years, Ethan said. 3 months at Ravenswood. Before that, 4 different places. 4 different. What does that mean? 4 different places. It means I moved a lot, sir. At 10:31 in a ballroom filled with 400 people who had come to celebrate their own generosity, nobody said a word for 6 full seconds. Then Ethan reached inside his service jacket. I have this, he said. He took out a folded stack of paper. It had been folded so many times that the creases had gone soft and white. It was maybe 9 pages. It was warm from his body. What is that? Richard Whitmore said. 12 weeks of observations. Ethan didn't hand it to him. Every Thursday, every Tuesday, every Saturday morning session in the annex. Times, songs, positions, and what her left side did. Songs. Yes, sir. Why would you write down songs? And Ethan Brooks looked at the man who had spent $4 million in 9 countries and said, because nobody else did. Reese held out his hand. Give them to me. Ethan didn't move. Son. With respect, sir, Ethan said quietly. The last time I gave somebody something I wrote about her, I got a form letter back that said they appreciated my interest in the field. Reese's arm dropped an inch. Who did? The clinical director of the group that runs her therapy. Who else? The therapist. Twice. The school nurse. And your office, sir. Dr. Alan Reese went absolutely still. What did you say? I called your office, Ethan said. About 7 weeks ago. A woman answered. She was very nice. She asked for my credentials, and I said I was a student, and she asked what program, and I said Ravenswood Academy. Reese's mouth had opened. And she said, the high school, Ethan said. And I said yes, and she said somebody would call me back. Nobody called you back, Reese said. No, sir. The old man turned around slowly and looked at 400 people, and then he turned back and his face had come apart. I never heard a word about it, he whispered. I swear to you on my life, son, not one word. I know, Ethan said. That's how it works. Somewhere near the windows, a woman started crying and had to leave. At 10:34, Brandon Keller came back with reinforcements. Dad over here. Senator Whit Keller was 58 years old silver at the temples, and he had a voice built for exactly this, for stepping into a room that had gotten away from everybody and pouring warm oil over the top of it. All right, he said pleasantly. All right, folks, let's everybody take a breath. Senator, Richard said, not now. Richard, Keller put a hand on his shoulder. Richard, listen to me as a friend. There are 400 people in this room. Half of them wrote checks tonight, and there is a kitchen employee standing in the middle of your dance floor giving medical opinions about your daughter. That's not what's happening. That is exactly what's happening, and I promise you tomorrow morning it will be a headline, and it will not be a kind one. Keller smiled at Ethan. It was a good smile. It had won 2 elections. Son, what's your name? Ethan Brooks. Ethan, you seem like a very bright kid. I mean that. But I want you to think about the position you're putting this family in. Sir, I'm not putting them in a position. You're telling a girl who has been through hell that she might walk, Keller said gently, in front of a room, with no license, no training, and no idea what happens to her at 3 o'clock in the morning when it turns out you were wrong. And that landed. Claire felt it land. She felt the room agree with him, 400 people exhaling at once because somebody had finally said something reasonable, and she watched Ethan Brooks take it directly in the chest. He didn't argue. That was the worst part. He just stood there and took it, because some part of him had been asking himself that same question for 3 months at 4 in the morning. Now here's what we're going to do, Keller said. Ethan's going to go on back to the kitchen. He doesn't work here anymore. Everyone turned. A man in a black vest had come out of the crowd, Doyle, the catering supervisor, and he had a company on the line and a client in front of him, and he made the choice in under a second. Brooks, give me the jacket. Mr. Doyle, give me the jacket, Ethan. You're done. Whatever this is, you're done. You're off the account, and honestly, you're done with the company. He held out his hand. Now. And Ethan Brooks, 17 years old, standing in the middle of 400 of the richest people in Massachusetts, reached up and started unbuttoning the white jacket. Because that's what you do. When you're him, that is what you do. You take it off and you hand it over and you walk, because arguing costs money you don't have. He got 2 buttons down. "Stop," Claire's voice. "Miss Whitmore, this is a staffing matter." "Stop unbuttoning it," Claire said. "Ethan, look at me. Don't you take that off." He looked at her. "Ma'am, Mr. Doyle." Claire turned her chair. Her hands were steady now. That was the thing she noticed in some strange back corner of her mind. Her hands had stopped shaking the exact moment she got angry. "Who signs your check for tonight?" Doyle blinked. "I'm sorry. Who signs the check? For the catering? For tonight in this house?" Silence. "Say it out loud." Your father's foundation, ma'am." "So you're standing in my mother's house," Claire said, "getting paid with my family's money, firing the only person in this building who crossed the floor when a boy shoved my chair into the middle of it." Doyle's face went the color of a brick. "Miss Whitmore." "Say his name." "What?" "You've been calling him Brooks all night. You called him Kitchen. Say his name, first name, right now in front of everybody, or you can hand me your jacket." Doyle's mouth worked. "Ethan," he said. "Good," Claire said. "Now go stand over there." He went and stood over there, and somewhere in the second row of that crowd, a 50-year-old woman said, "Oh, thank God," out loud, and put her hand over her mouth like she'd sworn in church. At 10:38, Margaret Vance took the folded pages out of Ethan Brooks's hand. He let her. That was what people noticed. He wouldn't give them to Reese, and he wouldn't give them to Richard Whitmore, but the second Margaret Vance said, "May I?" he put them in her hands like they weighed nothing. "Why her?" Richard said. "Because she said my mother's name," Ethan said, "and she said it like she liked her." Margaret Vance made a sound and turned away for a second. Then she unfolded the pages. The ballroom watched a 64-year-old woman in a green dress read 9 sheets of paper in the middle of a dance floor. It took her 4 minutes. Nobody moved. At one point she said, "Oh," very softly. At another point she looked up at the ceiling and breathed through her mouth. When she was done, she looked at Alan Reese. "Alan?" "What?" "Come here." "Margaret." "Alan, come here." He came. She put the pages in his hands and pointed at one line with a fingernail and said something to him that nobody else could hear, and Dr. Alan Reese read it and read it again, and then his knees actually went. He caught himself on Margaret Vance's arm. "Alan, I'm fine." "Somebody get him a chair." "I am fine." Reese straightened up. His voice came out wrong. "Richard." "What is it, Alan? What is it?" "Do you know what's on page 4 of this?" "I have no idea what's on page 4. 9 weeks ago," Reese said, "October 14th, this boy wrote down that during a passive range session with a radio playing your daughter's left foot rotated 15 degrees on the downbeat. Not once, 11 times. He looked up. In 11 weeks, he logged it 11 times, and every single time it was in tempo, and the 11 times he logged it. Do you know what else he logged? Alan. He logged the therapist's response," Reese said. The old man's voice broke wide open. "He wrote it down 11 times, Richard, 11 times in a boy's handwriting. Reported to staff, response spasm, reported to staff, response spasm, reported to staff, response nothing." Richard Whitmore looked at the pages. Then he looked at his daughter. Then he looked at a boy in a half-unbuttoned service jacket, and something in his face that had been welded shut for 23 months came off its hinges. 11 times, he said. "Yes, sir. You told them 11 times." "Yes, sir." "And nobody," Richard stopped. He couldn't get through the sentence. "Nobody wrote it down." "They wrote down what they measured," Ethan said. "They measured her right. Every one of them measured her exactly right, sir. That's the part nobody wants to hear. Nobody was lazy. Nobody was bad at their job." He looked at Claire. "They just measured her in a quiet room." "What does that mean?" Richard said. "What does that mean, a quiet room?" "It means for 2 years," Ethan said, "every single test anybody ever ran on your daughter, they ran in silence." At 10:42, a man in the crowd said, "Wait." He said it loud enough that heads turned. Bill Hargrove was 66 years old, and he had made his money in freight, and he had been standing near the back with a drink in his hand doing nothing at all, and now he was pushing through people like he was drowning. Wait. What did you say your name was? Ethan Brooks, sir. Brooks. Hargrove got to the front and stopped. Brooks. Your mother was Diane Brooks. Yes, sir. Diane Brooks from Boston General. Pediatric floor. 3rd floor, the one with the fish on the wall. Ethan's face changed for the first time all night. Yes, sir. Bill Hargrove put his drink down on a passing tray without looking at it. Do you know who I am? No, sir. My son is Danny Hargrove, he said. He's 33 years old. He's got 2 kids. He coaches Little League in Newton. Ethan didn't move. He was 6, Hargrove said. T11, 1999. They told my wife they told us the whole thing, the whole speech in a hallway, and then a woman came in with a clipboard and a ponytail and she said, I'd like 14 months. He stopped. He had to. 14 months, he said. 14 months, 5 days a week, and she never took a dime extra, and when he stood up, she wasn't even in the room. She was down the hall with somebody else's kid. Alan Reese closed his eyes. I've been trying to find her family for 11 years. Bill Hargrove said. The ballroom made a sound. I called the hospital when I heard she passed. They said she had a son. They said he'd gone into the system and they couldn't tell me anything else because of privacy. And I hired a man and he came back and said he couldn't find you and I... Hargrove's voice cracked straight down the middle. So I started a scholarship. That's what I did instead. I put her name on a scholarship. He looked at Ethan. Son, do you know what the Hargrove Scholarship is? Ethan didn't answer. It's the Diane Brooks Award, Bill Hargrove said. That's what it's called on the paperwork. That's what it's been called for 9 years. And Ethan Brooks, who had not cried once in that ballroom, who had not cried when a boy grabbed his collar, or when a man took his jacket, put his hand over his eyes. They just told me I was the Hargrove Scholar, he said. What, the front desk, Ethan said, in September. They said I was the Hargrove Scholar, and that it was a wonderful program. Bill Hargrove looked at him. Nobody told you it had her name on it. No, sir. Nobody told you. Hargrove turned around and looked at the room wildly at all of them. Where's Peterson? Where's the headmaster? Somebody get me Peterson right now. Bill. He's been wiping tables, Bill Hargrove shouted, and 400 people flinched. He's been carrying trays at my table. For 3 months, he served me a drink in October. I remember it. I remember his face, and nobody in that school thought to tell that boy whose name was on his own scholarship. Nobody answered him, because the answer was in the room. The answer was standing in the room in 400 pairs of very good shoes, and every single person there knew it. They didn't tell him, because they never asked him anything. At 10:47, Claire Whitmore said, I want to hear the letter. Everyone turned. What letter? Richard said. There's a letter in those pages. Claire was looking at Margaret Vance. Isn't there? That's why you stopped. Page 8. You stopped and you said, oh. Margaret Vance's eyes came up. Claire. Is it to me? Silence. Is it addressed to me? Ethan Brooks said, don't. Is it addressed to me, Ethan? Please don't, he said. Please. And that was the first time all night that his voice did anything at all, and every person in that ballroom heard it, and Claire Whitmore heard it loudest of all. You wrote me a letter, she said. It doesn't matter. When? It doesn't matter. 3 weeks ago, Margaret Vance said quietly. It's dated. Claire's head came around. 3 weeks ago, she said slowly. The hallway. Ethan didn't answer. The annex hallway, Claire said. You stopped me. You said you set up the mats, and then you said never mind and you walked away. Yes, you had it in your pocket. Yes. Why didn't you give it to me? And Ethan Brooks, 17 years old, standing in the middle of the wealthiest room in Boston, with his jacket half unbuttoned and a supervisor's hand still warm on his shoulder, said the truest thing anybody said all night. Because you would have looked at me the way they all look at you. The ballroom went dead. Claire Whitmore's face came apart. Read it, she said. Claire, Mrs. Vance, please, read it out loud. Margaret Vance looked at Ethan. She waited. She actually waited for a 17-year-old orphan to give her permission in a room full of billionaires, and it was the first time in Ethan Brooks's entire life that a person with any power at all had waited for him to say yes. He nodded once. She read it. Miss Whitmore, my name is Ethan Brooks, and I set up the mats on Thursdays. I'm writing this instead of saying it because if I say it, you'll be polite to me, and I can't do that today. Somebody in the crowd made a noise. I've watched your sessions for 11 weeks. I'm not a doctor. My mother was a physical therapist, and she taught me how to watch people, and that is the only qualification I have, so please throw this away if you want to. Margaret Vance's voice was already going. On October 14th, a radio was on in the annex. It was a station out of Cambridge. There were strings in the song. Your left foot moved 15 degrees on the downbeat, and then again 8 bars later, and then again. I told the therapist, and she said it was a spasm. She wasn't lying to you. She just wasn't watching. Spasms don't have rhythm. Richard Whitmore had both hands over his mouth. I've told 5 people. None of them called back. So I want to tell you because it's your body and it's your life. And I think somebody should tell you directly instead of telling somebody else about you, which is what everybody has been doing for 2 years. Claire made a sound like she'd been hit. Here is what I think. I think when they hurt you, your body shut the road down instead of admitting part of it still worked. I think everybody has been testing you in silence and your body doesn't answer to silence. I think it answers to music because you spent 11 years teaching it to. The pages were shaking in Margaret Vance's hands. I'm not promising you anything. I'm not going to be another person who promises you something. I don't know if you'll walk. Nobody knows, and anybody who tells you they know is selling you something. She stopped. She had to stop. Finish it, Claire whispered. Margaret Vance took a breath. But I know they never asked you to want anything, not once in 2 years. They asked you to accept and to adjust and to be brave, and every one of those words means we have decided nothing is going to change. Nobody in that room was breathing. So this is me asking, not a doctor, not your father, just the kid who wipes the mats. Margaret Vance looked up. Miss Whitmore, do you still want it? And the last line, because if you do, I'll bring the music. 400 people stood in a ballroom in Boston, Massachusetts, and did not make one single sound. Claire Whitmore sat in the middle of the floor with tears running straight down her face and did not wipe them. 3 weeks, she said. Claire, that was in your pocket 3 weeks ago, she said, and you stood in that hallway and you looked at me and you said, never mind. Yes. Why? I told you why. No, tell me the real one. Her voice ripped. Tell me the real reason. And Ethan Brooks said, because I'm nobody, and I've been nobody my whole life, and I have never once said a true thing to a person like you and had it end well. Claire Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, come here. Miss Whitmore, come here. He came. He knelt again on the marble, and this time nobody in that room laughed. Ethan Brooks, she said. Yes, you're wrong about one thing. Okay, you're not nobody, Claire said. You're the only somebody in this entire room. At 10:51, Claire Whitmore turned her chair and faced the ballroom. I want to say something, she said, and then I want everybody to do exactly what I say one time, and then you can all go back to your drinks and never think about me again. Nobody moved. 6 of you wouldn't dance with me tonight. Cole Bannister looked at the floor. Cole, Marcus, you know who you are. I'm not mad at you. I want you to hear that. I'm not. Her voice was very level. Because you weren't cruel. You were just embarrassed, and you were 20, and you did the math about how it would look, and everybody in this room has done that math about me for 2 years. Sydney was sobbing openly at the drinks table. And Brandon. Brandon Keller's head came up. Brandon was the only honest person here tonight, Claire said. That's the part you all should be sick about. He said out loud what this whole room has been saying quietly since I came through that door at 8 o'clock. Claire, Senator Keller said, that's not fair to my son. 6 people used the word brave on me before 9 p.m., Claire said. Not one of you asked me what I'm reading. Not one asked if I applied anywhere. Not one asked me a single question that didn't have my chair in it. Patricia Dean put her hand over her mouth. So I'm going to ask for one thing, Claire said. She turned around. Ethan Brooks? Yes. May I have this dance? The ballroom detonated. Not applause sound. 400 people making a noise all at once, and a woman near the window shouting, "Yes!" and Bill Hargrove turning away with his fist against his mouth, and Doyle, the catering supervisor, standing there with a look on his face like a man watching his own funeral. Ethan Brooks did not smile. "Not yet," he said. The room stopped. "What?" Claire said. "Not like this." He stood up. "Not with everybody watching you like it's a show. That's what tonight has been. That's what all of it's been. You want to do this in front of 400 people who just found their conscience 20 minutes ago." Claire stared at him, and then she started to laugh. It came out wet and cracked, and it was the first laugh out of Claire Whitmore in 23 months, and it went through that room like a bell. "Ethan," she said, "they already saw the worst night of my life. They can watch the rest." He looked at her for a second. "Okay," he said. And then he turned and said to the orchestra, "Excuse me." The conductor blinked. "I'm sorry. The first song tonight, 9:10. What was it?" I'd have to check the... "It had strings," Ethan said. "It came up out of the low strings first, and then the violins came in at the 8th bar." The conductor's face changed. "Yes. Play it." "Son, I take my cues from Sal. Play it," Richard Whitmore said. Everyone turned. Richard Whitmore was standing in the middle of his own ballroom with his tie crooked and his face wrecked, and he was not looking at the conductor. He was looking at his daughter. "Play the song," he said. At 10:55, Brandon Keller made his last mistake of the night. He stepped onto the floor. "This is insane!" He was talking fast now and loud, and his voice had gone up half an octave. "Everybody's just... This is a waiter. This is a kid from a group home. Am I the only person in this room who's... Brandon." Senator Keller's voice was very quiet. "Get off the floor." "Dad, get off the floor, son. You said he was a liability. You said it 30 seconds ago. You said Brandon." "No." Brandon Keller turned on the room, and his face was red, and something in it had finally broken. "You people are unbelievable. 20 minutes ago, every single one of you agreed with me. Every one of you. You were standing right there. And here's the thing. He was right. 400 people knew he was right, and that was exactly why not one of them defended him, because the only thing a room like that hates more than cruelty is being reminded that it watched. "Somebody say something!" Brandon shouted. Nobody did. "Fine," he laughed. It came out wrong. "Fine. Enjoy the show." He walked out. His friends did not follow him. That was the part that finished it. His own friends stood there and let him walk out alone, and Brandon Keller went through those doors and out into 40-degree air by himself, and Claire Whitmore watched him go and felt absolutely nothing at all. Then the strings came up. At 10:58, the orchestra of the Whitmore Winter Charity Ball played the first song of the evening for the second time, and Ethan Brooks knelt down in front of Claire Whitmore's chair and did not touch it. "Okay," he said. "Okay. I'm not going to move you." "What?" "I'm not going to lift you. I'm not going to hold you up. I'm not going to do a single thing to you." His voice was so quiet she had to lean in. "Everybody's done things to you for 2 years. I'm not doing that." "Then what are you going to do?" "I'm going to ask you a question," Ethan said, "and I need you to actually answer it. Not be polite, not be brave. Actually answer it." "Okay." "Don't say okay yet." Claire's breath caught. "Claire." It was the first time he'd used her name. "Do you still want it?" And Claire Whitmore opened her mouth and could not speak, because she had spent 23 months teaching herself not to want it. She had built the whole architecture of her life on not wanting it. It had cost her everything she had, every night, every morning, every appointment. She had killed it the way you'd put down an animal over and over, because a want you can't have will eat you alive from the inside. And she had gotten so good at it. She had gotten so good. "I can't," she whispered. "Yes, you can." "You don't understand what you're asking me." "I understand exactly what I'm asking you. If I want it and it doesn't happen, then it doesn't happen," Ethan said. "And you'll be in the same chair you're in right now, and the only thing you'll have lost is one night." "That's not true." "No," he admitted. "It's not." Claire made a sound. Then why are you asking me? And Ethan Brooks said, because your mother's watching you and she hasn't blinked in 4 minutes, and your father hasn't said that sentence out loud in 2 years because he can't stand it either, and every single person in this building has been protecting you from wanting something, and Claire... His voice broke. Claire, nobody protects a dancer. Claire Whitmore closed her eyes. The violins came in on the 8th bar. And in the middle of that ballroom, in an ivory dress in front of 400 people who had spent an entire evening deciding not to see her, Claire Whitmore said, "Yes, I want it. God help me, I want it. I've wanted it every single day for 2 years, and I've never said it out loud, not once, not to anybody. Say it to me." "I want to dance," she sobbed. "I want to dance, I want to dance, I want it, I want it." "Then listen to the music," Ethan Brooks said. And Claire Whitmore's left foot moved. Not 15 degrees, her whole leg. 400 people saw it at the same time, and Eleanor Whitmore screamed. Eleanor Whitmore's scream went up into the ceiling of that ballroom, and 400 people came off their feet at once. "Claire! Oh my God! Did you see that? Did everybody see that? Somebody get a doctor, somebody!" They surged. That was the word for it. 100 people moved toward the center of the floor at the same instant, phones coming up, voices climbing over each other, and Claire Whitmore's chair disappeared into a wall of bodies in under 3 seconds. "Stop!" Ethan Brooks did not shout it. He never shouted all night, not once. But something in the flat of his voice cut through that room like a hand across a table, and 100 people stopped where they stood. "Nobody touch her. Son, get out of the way. Nobody touch her chair, nobody grab her legs, nobody puts a hand on her." He was still on one knee. He hadn't looked away from Claire's face one time. "Sir, put the phone down." "I'm just..." "Put it down." The man put it down. "Everybody back up 4 steps, Ethan said. "Right now, 4 steps." And the wealthiest room in Massachusetts took 4 steps backward because a 17-year-old orphan in an unbuttoned service jacket told it to. "Claire." She couldn't answer. Her mouth was open and nothing was coming out of it. "Claire, look at me. Don't look at your leg. Look at me." "I felt it," she said. "I know. Ethan, I felt it. I know." "No, you don't understand." She grabbed his wrist. It was the first time she'd touched him. "I didn't see it. I felt it. From the inside. I haven't felt anything from the inside in 2 years. They told me the inside was gone. They told me..." And then Claire Whitmore's face came apart completely, and she folded forward over her own knees in an ivory dress and sobbed like a child in front of 400 people. And Ethan Brooks stayed exactly where he was and did not touch her because nobody had asked him to. At 11 o'clock, Dr. Alan Reese got down on the marble floor of the Whitmore ballroom in a $1,700 suit. "Alan, you're hip. Get off me, Margaret." He went down on both knees and then further until he was sitting on the floor at the foot of Claire Whitmore's chair like a man at the beach. "Claire, sweetheart." "Dr. Reese." "Claire, I need you to let me look at your foot." His voice had gone very careful. "May I?" And Claire, through the crying, said the thing that put a knife straight through him. "You've never asked me that before." Alan Reese closed his eyes for 1 full second. "No," he said. "I haven't." Everybody they just take it. They pick it up. They move it. Like it's a, "I know." Like it's not attached to a person. "I know, sweetheart." His hands were trembling. "May I look at your foot?" "Yes." He touched her ankle the way you'd pick up something sleeping. "Ethan," he said, "come here. I want your eyes on this." Somebody in the crowd said out loud, "He's asking the waiter." Reese's head came around so fast that the man physically stepped back. "That boy has watched this girl for 140 hours, Reese said. "I've watched her for about 6. Do the arithmetic and then shut your mouth in my presence." Nobody said anything else for a while after that. "Now," Reese looked up. "Conductor, are you still there?" "Yes, sir." "Play it again." "The same. The same song, the same tempo from the top, and don't you dare speed up." Reese's hand was on Claire's ankle. "Claire, I'm not testing you. I want you to understand that. I'm not scoring you, and there's no chart, and nobody's writing anything down. I'm just going to hold your ankle, and you're going to listen to music. What if nothing happens? then nothing happens. What if it was Then it was a spasm, and you're no worse off than you were at 8 o'clock, Reese said, and I'll be the old fool who sat on the floor, and I've been an old fool before. The strings came up. 400 people stood in absolute silence and watched a 71-year-old physician hold a girl's ankle. 8 bars. Nothing. 12 bars. Nothing. And Eleanor Whitmore had both hands over her face, and Claire's breathing was going ragged and fast, and Ethan said quietly, "Don't try. Claire, you're trying. Stop trying." "What?" "You're not trying to move your foot. You're trying to prove it to them." He leaned in. "Forget them. They're not here. Nobody's here. It's a Thursday and there's a radio on." Claire Whitmore closed her eyes, and on the 16th bar under Alan Reese's hand, her ankle turned. The old man made a sound that came out of somewhere underneath his ribs. "Oh," he said. "Oh, you sweet girl." "Alan." Richard's voice was in pieces. "Alan, what is it?" "That's not a spasm." "Alan, that is not a spasm, Richard." Reese's face was wet. He didn't seem to know it. "A spasm is a firecracker. This is a sentence. She's answering the music." "What does that mean, Alan, in English? What does that—" "It means the road is not gone," Reese said. "It means somewhere down there the line is still live and the signal is still crossing, and it has been crossing this entire time." Richard Whitmore said, "How long?" Nobody answered him. "How long?" he said again. Alan Reese would not look at him. "Alan, look at me. How long has my daughter's leg been able to do that?" And Ethan Brooks said, 11 weeks, sir. That's when I started counting." "That's when you started?" "Yes." "That's not what I asked you." Richard Whitmore's voice had gone somewhere terrible. "I didn't ask when you started. I asked how long." Ethan didn't say anything. "Say it." "I don't know, sir." "Guess." "Sir." "Guess." And Ethan Brooks said, "Longer than 11 weeks." At 11:06, Richard Whitmore said 4 words that emptied that ballroom out like a fire alarm. "Get me her chart." "Richard, get me my daughter's chart right now, tonight. Somebody in this room can get me a login. I have paid every single one of you. Somebody get me her file." "Mr. Whitmore, it's 11 o'clock at night. Do you know what I do for a living?" Richard turned around. "I move money. That's it. That's the whole thing. I can move $40 million at 11 o'clock at night from a phone in my pocket, and you're telling me nobody in this building can pull up a PDF?" Margaret Vance said, "I can." Everything stopped. Margaret, not her whole chart, her therapy notes. Margaret Vance had her phone out, and her reading glasses were somewhere in a purse she'd abandoned 20 minutes ago. "I sit on the review board for 3 of the outpatient groups in this city. I don't have privileges, I have oversight, and I'm going to lose my seat for this, and I want everybody here to understand that I don't care." "Margaret, which group runs her Thursdays?" She was already typing. "Ethan, who runs the annex sessions?" "Meridian, ma'am." Margaret Vance's thumb stopped. "Say that again." "Meridian Rehabilitation Partners." And in that entire ballroom, exactly 2 people understood what had just happened, and one of them was Margaret Vance, and the other one was Bill Hargrove. And Bill Hargrove said very quietly, "Oh, no." "What?" Richard said. What is it?" Margaret Vance looked up from her phone. "Richard," she said, "who owns Meridian?" "I don't know who owns Meridian. Why would I know who?" And then Richard Whitmore stopped talking. 400 people watched a billionaire's face go absolutely empty. "Richard, that's not—" He put a hand out at nothing. No, that's a portfolio company that's not—" "Say it out loud," Margaret Vance said. "Whitmore Capital took a position in Meridian 14 months ago," Richard said. The room made a noise. "A position?" Margaret Vance repeated. "A controlling position." His voice had gone flat and small and horrible. 62%. Why? Because they were the best outpatient group in New England, and they were underfunded, and I wanted— He stopped. "Say the rest." "I wanted my daughter to have the best," Richard Whitmore said, "so I bought it." Nobody moved. And Claire Whitmore, sitting in her chair with tears drying on her face, said, "Dad." He couldn't look at her. "Dad, look at me." "Claire." For 14 months, she said slowly. Every therapist who's put their hands on me has worked for you. It wasn't every clinical director who signed my paperwork has worked for you. Claire, it was blind. It was a fund. I never... Did they know? Claire said. Richard Whitmore's mouth opened. Did they know whose daughter I was? And Dr. Alan Reese, sitting on the floor with his hand still on her ankle, said, Of course they knew. Richard whirled. Alan! Of course they knew, Richard. The old man was shouting now, and his voice cracked and went thin, and he kept going anyway. Everybody knew. There isn't a clinician in this city who didn't know. You think a 26-year-old therapist making $61,000 a year is going to walk into a room and tell the man who owns her company that his $4 million of specialists in 6 countries missed something? That's not... She's going to write spasm? Reese shouted. She's going to write spasm and go home and eat dinner and keep her job. And 11 weeks later, a 17-year-old boy with no job to lose is the only person in the building who can afford to say a true thing out loud. The ballroom was dead quiet. You bought it so she'd get the best, Reese said. And the second you bought it, nobody could ever tell you anything again. Richard Whitmore stood in the middle of his own floor and did not say a word. At 11:11, Margaret Vance found October 14th. Everybody knew the second she found it because she stopped and her whole body went stiff and she said, Oh, you sons of a Margaret. Oh, I'm going to end them. Margaret, what does it say? She looked up. Ethan, she said. October 14th. What did you write? Left foot 15 degrees on the downbeat. 11:04 in the morning. Reported to staff. Response spasm. Margaret Vance read from her phone. Session 11:12, passive range bilateral lower, no notable response. Patient in good spirits, continue current plan. Nobody said anything. October 21st, she said, no notable response. October 28th, no notable response. November 4th, stop, Claire said, no notable response. Stop. 11 weeks, Margaret Vance said, and 11 times and the same 4 words, and they didn't even bother to change the phrasing. Claire Whitmore put her hand over her mouth. That's my file, she said. Yes. Those are my Thursdays. That's my whole life. That's what I did instead of college. She was starting to shake. That's what I did instead of everything, and it says no notable response. Claire. 280 sessions, she said. I counted them. I counted every one. I used to lie there and count the ceiling tiles and tell myself it was worth it, because they'd know, because they were professionals, because if anything happened, they'd see it. And then Claire Whitmore said something that 400 people in that ballroom would carry to their graves. I thought my body was lying to me. Ethan Brooks's head came up. What? I thought I was crazy, Claire said. That's what I want everybody in this room to understand. I felt things. Not a lot, not often. But sometimes on a Thursday I'd feel something down there, and I'd say something and they'd smile at me and say, That's the phantom sensation, honey, that's very common, and I'd go home. She stopped. She couldn't get through it. And I'd go home and I'd think you're doing it again. You're making it up. You want it so bad you're inventing it. Her voice went to nothing. So I stopped saying it. About a year ago, I just stopped telling anybody. Eleanor Whitmore made a sound like something breaking. Claire, she whispered, you never told me that. No, Mom, I didn't. Why didn't you tell me? Because you would have called Dad, Claire said, and Dad would have booked another flight and I'd have spent 9 days in Barcelona finding out I was crazy in Spanish. At 11:15, Bill Hargrove said, That's enough. Everyone turned. That's enough, he said again. Richard, I've known you 18 years. Alan, I've known you longer. And I'm going to say the thing nobody in this room has the guts to say. Bill. There's a girl sitting in the middle of this floor who spent a year thinking she was insane, Hargrove said, and every adult in this building had a reason for it. Everybody had a good reason. The therapist had a good reason. The company had a good reason. Alan had a good reason. Richard, you had the best reason of all. You loved her so much you bought the whole hospital. He looked around, and the only person in this room who didn't have a reason is the one we made carry the drinks. Nobody answered him. Somebody get that boy a chair, Bill Hargrove said. He's been on his knees for 40 minutes. And a woman named Patricia Dean, who had called Claire brave 11 seconds after she came through the door, turned around and picked up a chair with her own 2 hands and carried it across a ballroom in a gown that cost more than a car and set it down behind Ethan Brooks and said, "I'm sorry, I don't know what else to say. I'm just so sorry." Ethan looked at the chair. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm okay standing." "Please sit down." "Ma'am, please." Patricia Dean said, "Let me do one thing tonight." He sat down. At 11:18, Dr. Alan Reese made his confession. Nobody asked him to. That was the thing. He simply started talking from the floor, and after the first sentence, nobody in that room breathed. "I said it in a hallway," he said, 23 months ago. "Second floor Mass General outside room 214. I had a hand on your father's shoulder and I said, 'She will never walk again,' and then I went out to my car." "Alan," Margaret said, "and I sat in my own driveway for 40 minutes because I couldn't go in the house." He wasn't looking at anyone. "And I want to tell all of you exactly why I said it, because I've been dressing it up for 2 years and I'm done." "Alan, don't." "I said it because I was 70 years old and I was tired," Reese said. "The room went cold. Not tired that day. Tired for about 10 years. And when you get tired, you stop looking for the door and you start reading the chart, because the chart is easier. The chart lets you off the chart, lets you go home at 6. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "And I had a number in my head from the imaging, and the number was bad. And I said the sentence I've said 400 times, and I said it fast, Richard. That's what I can't get past. I said it in 22 minutes. Richard Whitmore said, "You called Diane Brooks." "Yes." "After." "Yes." "So you knew." Richard's voice was rising. "You knew there was somebody who could have—" "I knew there was one person on this earth I'd have handed her to," Reese said. "And I called and they told me she'd been dead 11 years and I hung up that phone and I did the worst thing I have ever done in 43 years of medicine." "What?" "I felt relieved," Alan Reese said. The ballroom made a sound like a room full of people being hit. "I felt relieved, Richard, because if Diane Brooks was dead, then there was nobody left to prove me wrong, and I could just be right, and I could go home." Reese finally looked up at Ethan. "And her boy," he said, "has been standing 11 feet from me at charity functions for 3 months holding a tray, and I have never once looked at his face." He put his hand over his eyes. 11 years, he said. "She's been gone 11 years and her whole life fit in a backpack, and nobody ever asked that child a single question." At 11:22, Claire Whitmore said, "Everybody stop." They stopped. "I want to say something to all of you, and I'm only saying it once." She was very calm now. That was the frightening part. Everybody in that room had watched her cry for an hour, and now she was calm. "You're all doing the thing again." "Claire." "You are." She looked around. 20 minutes ago it was poor Claire. Now it's poor Claire, and let's all confess, and let's all cry, and let's all feel the enormous weight of what we've done. And I want you to hear how that sounds from down here. Nobody moved. "It's still about you," Claire said. Somebody actually flinched. "Dad, Dr. Reese, Mom, I love you. I'm not doing this tonight." She turned her chair a few degrees. "You want to fix it? Fix it Monday. Fire somebody. Sell the company. Write a check. Change a law. I don't care. Do it Monday." "Claire, sweetheart." "Because tonight," Claire Whitmore said, "I've got a song." And then she turned to a 17-year-old boy sitting in a chair Patricia Dean had carried across a ballroom, and she said, "Ethan, are we doing this or not?" Ethan Brooks stood up. "We're doing it," he said. "At 11:24 they tried it for the first time and it failed." "Okay." Ethan was in front of her chair, not touching it. "Hands on my shoulders." "That's it. That's it. You're not going to—" "I'm not going to lift you. I'm not going to hold you. I'm not going to pull." His voice was absolutely level. "If you go down, you go down. I'll be there. But I'm not taking you up. Ethan, if I go down in front of these people, then you go down in front of these people," he said, "and it'll be the second worst thing that happened to you tonight." Claire made a sound that was half a laugh. "Okay." "Hands on my shoulders." She put her hands on his shoulders. "Now listen," he said. "Not to me, to the music. Second bar the strings come up. You know this song better than anybody in this building. You've known it since you were 7. Ethan, what did your instructor make you do on the 8 count? Claire's whole face changed. How do you know about the 8 count? Because you did it at 9:10 tonight, he said. Sitting in that chair, right hand 2 inches, and you held it, and then you looked around to see if anybody saw. Claire Whitmore stopped breathing. Somebody saw, Ethan Brooks said. The strings came up. She leaned forward. And for 1 second, 1 full second, Claire Whitmore's weight came off that chair and onto her own legs, and 400 people saw it, and then her left knee folded like paper, and she went straight down. The room screamed. Ethan Brooks caught her. Not up, down. He went down with her, both of them, onto the marble, his arm behind her back, and they hit the floor together, and Claire's face slammed into his shoulder, and she made a terrible sound. Claire, get away from her. Somebody call an ambulance, nobody move, Ethan said. They stopped. Claire was shaking against him, her whole body head to foot. Claire, listen to me. I can't. Claire, I can't. I'm sorry. Why are you apologizing? Because they're all... She was gasping. They're all watching, and I said yes, and I wanted it. I finally wanted it, and it didn't... Claire? You made me want it, she sobbed. 2 years of not wanting it, and you made me want it in 1 hour, and I can't put it back. And Ethan Brooks, sitting on the floor of the Whitmore ballroom with the richest girl in Massachusetts, crying into his neck, and 400 people standing over them, said, "Good." Claire went still. "What?" "Good," he said. "Don't put it back, ever. Ethan, you went down in 3 seconds. You know what my mother used to say about 3 seconds?" "What?" Claire whispered. "Nothing," Ethan said. She'd say nothing. She'd write down 3 seconds, and then she'd say, "That's the number we're beating on Thursday." Claire made a sound that was crying and laughing at the same time. 3 seconds, she said. 3 seconds is not 0. Ethan. Claire, listen to me. He pulled back so she could see his face. For 23 months, the number was 0. 12 specialists in 6 countries said the number was 0 forever. And you just did 3 seconds on a marble floor in a dress with no warm-up at 11 o'clock at night. Claire Whitmore stared at him. "Do you want to do it again?" Ethan asked, and Claire said yes. At 11:29, they went again. She fell in 2 seconds. "Again," she said. Nobody in that ballroom said a word. Nobody said, "Be careful." Nobody said, "Maybe that's enough for tonight, sweetheart." Eleanor Whitmore stood there with both hands over her mouth and did not say one single word, and it was the hardest thing she had ever done in her life. Again. 4 seconds. Again. 2. Again. Claire. Again. And on the 8th attempt at 11:36 p.m., Claire Whitmore's hands came off Ethan Brooks's shoulders. Nobody noticed at first. That was the thing. It happened so quietly. She came up and she wobbled, and her left knee shook, and her right hand let go of his shoulder and came out to the side 2 inches and up, and held the way a 7-year-old girl had been taught to hold it on an 8 count in a studio in Back Bay 11 years earlier. And then her left hand let go. Claire Whitmore stood, by herself, on her own 2 legs in the middle of the ballroom with nothing holding her up. 1 second. 2. Nobody breathed. Nobody made a sound. 400 of the wealthiest people in Massachusetts stood in absolute silence and watched a girl stand. 3, 4. Alan Reese was on the floor with his fist against his mouth. 5, 6. Richard Whitmore said his daughter's name and no sound came out. 7. And on the 8th second, Claire Whitmore looked up. Not at the room, not at her father, not at her mother, not at 400 people who had spent an entire evening deciding not to see her. She looked at the boy standing in front of her with his hands out and not touching her, and she said with tears running down her face and her whole body shaking, "May I have this dance?" Ethan Brooks did not answer her. For 3 full seconds he could not make his mouth work, and 400 people watched a 17-year-old boy stand in front of a standing girl and simply come apart. "Ethan." "Yeah. I asked you a question." "I know." "Ethan Brooks." Her legs were shaking so hard, the hem of the ivory dress was moving. "I'm not going to be able to hold this much longer, so if you could..." "Yes," he said. "God, yes, yes." And Claire Whitmore put her hands on his shoulders, and Ethan Brooks put his hands on her waist, and the orchestra of the Whitmore Winter Charity Ball, which had not been given a single instruction in 20 minutes, came in on the 8th bar anyway. It was not a dance. That's what everybody said afterward in the interviews and the podcasts and the 6,000 comments under the video. They all wanted to make it beautiful. It wasn't beautiful. It was a girl swaying maybe 4 inches to either side with her weight going onto a boy's shoulders every time her left knee gave out, and it lasted 19 seconds before she went down again. Ethan went down with her, and then she came back up, and they did it again for 11 more seconds, and then again. Nobody counted the falls. Somebody tried later, watching the phone footage frame by frame, and gave up at 14. At 11:41, Eleanor Whitmore finally moved. She came across that floor at a dead run in heels and went down on her knees beside her daughter and grabbed her face with both hands. "Mom, don't talk. Mom, don't you talk to me right now, Claire Elizabeth." Eleanor Whitmore was crying so hard she couldn't see. I stood there. I stood there for an hour and I didn't say one word. Do you know what that cost me? Do you have any idea? Mom, I know. I have wanted to pick you up off a floor for 2 years, Eleanor sobbed. 2 years, every day, every single day, and every day somebody told me not to. And tonight I stood there while you fell down 8 times in front of 400 people, and I let you. Claire looked at her mother. That's the first time, she said. What? That's the first time in 2 years anybody let me fall. Eleanor Whitmore put her forehead against her daughter's forehead and made a sound that had no words in it at all. At 11:44, Richard Whitmore said, "I want to say the sentence." Nobody knew what he meant, except 3 people, and one of them was his daughter, and her head came up like she'd been called. "Dad, no, let me." He was standing about 6 feet away, and he had not come closer because he had not been invited. And for the first time in his life, Richard Whitmore had noticed that. "You told me at 9 o'clock tonight to say the word. Do you remember?" "I remember. And I said I wouldn't do it here. Dad, you don't have to." "Claire, I have spent 23 months not saying it," Richard said, "and I told myself that was love. I told myself that a man who says it out loud has quit. Every flight, every specialist, every check. I thought I was fighting for you." His voice went. "And you told me at 9 o'clock that all you ever heard was that the daughter I had wasn't good enough." The ballroom didn't move. "So here it is," Richard Whitmore said, "in front of everybody, in my own house." He looked at her. "They said you would never walk again." Claire's face crumpled. "They said it, and I heard it, and it was true for 2 years, and I loved you every single day of those 2 years, exactly as much as I love you right now." He couldn't get through it clean. Nobody expected him to. "And if you never take another step as long as you live, I will love you exactly this much on the day I die." That's the sentence. That's the whole sentence. I should have said it in the hallway. Claire Whitmore stood in the middle of the floor, holding a boy's shoulders, and said, "Dad, come here." And Richard Whitmore, who had solved supply chains and housing crises and 3 failing companies, crossed 6 feet of marble and put his arms around his daughter for the first time in 2 years while she was standing up. At 11:52, Margaret Vance said the thing that turned the whole night sideways again. She had been on her phone for 11 minutes. She had not looked up once. And when she finally did, her voice came out strange. "Ethan?" "Ma'am." "The letter you wrote. To the clinical director at Meridian, the one that came back." "Yes, ma'am." "You said it was a form response." "Yes." "Do you still have it?" Ethan reached into his jacket. He had it. Of course he had it. He had everything. That was the whole tragedy of Ethan Brooks, that a person with nothing keeps every single piece of paper anybody ever hands them. Margaret Vance unfolded it and read 4 lines, and then she said out loud, "No." "Margaret," Reese said. "What?" "No, no, no, no." "Margaret." She looked up, and her face was the color of the tablecloths. "Who signed it?" Reese said. "Karen Ellery," Margaret Vance said. And Dr. Alan Reese stood up off that floor like a man 20 years younger. "That's not possible." "It's her signature, Alan." "That's not possible." "Who is Karen Ellery?" Richard said. "Somebody tell me who Karen Ellery is?" And Margaret Vance turned around and looked at Ethan Brooks and said very quietly, "Son, Karen Ellery was your mother's student." The ballroom made a noise that had no shape. "What?" Ethan said. "She trained under Diane at Boston General, 1996 to 2000. Margaret's hands were shaking. "She was 23 years old. Your mother taught her everything she knows. She spoke at the memorial, Ethan. I was there. She stood up in front of 200 people, and she cried, and she said, 'Diane Brooks taught me to look at the patient and not the chart.'" Nobody said a word. And 11 weeks ago, Margaret Vance said she got a letter from a 17-year-old boy that said her left foot moved in time with the music, and she sent back a form. Ethan Brooks looked at the piece of paper in her hand. "She didn't know who I was," he said. "No. She didn't know my name." "Brooks is a common name," Margaret said, "and you were a student, and she gets 40 of those a month." And then Ethan Brooks said the sentence that 400 people carried home with them that night. "So it's not that they're bad, Ethan. That's what I'm saying." His voice cracked for the second time all night. "Everybody in this room wants there to be a villain. Everybody wants it to be him." He gestured at nothing at the doors Brandon Keller had walked out of 40 minutes ago. "It's not him. It's a woman who loved my mother and got tired. It's a doctor who got tired. It's a therapist with a mortgage. It's a father who bought a company. It's 400 people who were embarrassed." He looked around that ballroom. "Nobody in this story hated her," Ethan Brooks said. "That's the part that should keep you up. Not one person in 2 years hated Claire Whitmore. They just stopped looking at her, and stopping is free." Nobody answered him, because there was no answer, and everybody there knew it. At 11:58, Bill Hargrove made his offer, and Ethan Brooks turned it down. "Son, listen to me." Hargrove had a hand on his own chest like something hurt. "Whatever you need. School, medical school, an apartment, a car. I don't care what it costs. I've got a foundation with your mother's name on it, and I've been trying to give it away for 9 years to a kid I couldn't find. Sir, don't you say no to me." "Sir, I'm not saying no to you. I'm saying no to tonight." Ethan's voice was steady. "Everybody in this room feels terrible right now. That's the worst possible time to take somebody's money." "That's not—" "It'd be a tip," Ethan said. Bill Hargrove's mouth closed. "Sir, I've carried trays at 11 of these," Ethan said. "I know what it looks like when a rich man feels bad at midnight. It's beautiful. It's real. And by Wednesday it's gone. And I don't want anything that has to survive until Wednesday." Nobody had ever spoken to Bill Hargrove that way in his life. He put a hand over his eyes. "God Almighty," he said, "you're her kid, all right." At 6 minutes past midnight, Doyle came back. The catering supervisor, the man who had held out his hand for a jacket. He came out of the crowd, and he was gray, and he stopped about 8 feet away and could not get any closer. "Mr. Brooks?" Ethan turned around. "I want to—" Doyle stopped. Started again. "I've got a company on the phone. They want a statement, and I want to tell you before I say anything to anybody that I'm the one who did that to you." "Mr. Doyle." "I've got a daughter," Doyle said. "She's 9, and I'm going to go home tonight, and she's going to be asleep, and I'm going to stand in her doorway and think about the fact that I fired a 17-year-old kid in front of 400 people for crossing a room. You had a client. Don't." Doyle's voice broke. "Don't you defend me, kid. That's what no. Don't do that. I made $1,100 tonight and I sold you for it, and you're standing there giving me an out." Ethan Brooks looked at him for a second. "Mr. Doyle," he said, "you want to fix it?" "Yes. The next time somebody's in trouble in your room, cross the floor." Doyle stood there. "That's it. That's the whole thing," Ethan said. "That's the entire thing. It's not complicated. It never was." At 12:14, Claire Whitmore sat back down. She had been standing and falling and standing for 38 minutes, and her legs were gone, and Ethan got her into the chair the way you'd set down something made of glass, and the second she was in it, she started laughing. "What?" Ethan said. "I hate it." "What?" "I hate this chair." Claire Whitmore was laughing and crying at the same time. "I've been in it for 2 years, and I made peace with it. I made peace with it, Ethan. Do you know how long that took? And I sat down just now and I hate it. I hate it. Good, Ethan said. You keep saying that. Because it's good. It's not good, it's... She stopped. She looked up at him. Oh. Yeah. Oh, you... Claire put both hands over her face. That's what you were doing. That's what you were doing the whole time. Yeah. You didn't come over here to make me walk. No. You came over here to make me want. And Ethan Brooks said, Claire wanting is the only medicine I've got. Everything else is Thursdays. At 12:22, Dr. Alan Reese asked for a job. He was 71 years old. He had 43 years, 2 named wings, and an office with a waiting list of 9 months, and he stood in the middle of the Whitmore ballroom and said it out loud in front of 400 people. Ethan, sir, I want to read the notebook. Sir. 400 pages, Reese said. I want to read every page, and then I want you to teach me what she taught you. Somebody actually gasped. Alan, Margaret Vance said. Alan, what are you... Margaret, I said the sentence 400 times. The old man's voice was absolutely level. 400 times in hallways with my hand on somebody's shoulder, and I said it in 22 minutes, and I want to know how many of them were Claire. The room went cold. That's what I'd like everybody here to sit with tonight, Reese said. Not her, them. How many of them were her? Nobody breathed. So I'm asking a 17-year-old boy to teach me my own job, Alan Reese said. And I'd like to be very clear that I'm not doing it because I feel bad. I'm doing it because he's right and I'm wrong, and I have maybe 9 working years left, and I would like to spend them differently. Ethan Brooks looked at him for a long moment. Sir, he said, there's a line on page 206. What line? They stop trying when we stop looking, not the other way around. Alan Reese closed his eyes. Say it again, he said. They stop trying when we stop looking. Not the other way around, the old man whispered, and he put his hand over his mouth and turned away from the room, because there is a limit to what a man will do in public, even at midnight, even then. At 12:31, Richard Whitmore made a phone call from the middle of his own ballroom. He did not go outside. He did not step into a hallway. He stood in the exact center of that floor with 400 people around him and his daughter beside him, and he put the phone on speaker, and everybody heard it ring. Richard, a man's voice thick with sleep. It's 12:30, what? Marcus, it's Richard. Are you awake? I am now. Whitmore Capital's position in Meridian Rehabilitation Partners, 62%. I want it divested by Friday. Silence on the line. Richard, by Friday, Marcus. That's $140 million. You cannot just sell it at a loss. Richard, are you drunk? I've never been more sober in my life, Richard Whitmore said. And Marcus, one more thing. Karen Ellery. Who? Clinical director. I don't want her fired. Claire's head came up. You don't want her. I want her in a room with my daughter, Richard said, and I want somebody to ask her why she stopped looking, and then I want her to keep her job, and I want her to remember it for the rest of her career, because firing her costs me nothing and teaches nobody anything. He hung up, and 400 people stood there, and somebody in the back started clapping, and Richard Whitmore turned around and said, "Don't." The clapping died instantly. "Don't do that," he said. "I bought a company because I couldn't stand to hear a true thing. That's not worth applause. That's worth about 11 weeks of a girl's life." At 12:40, Sydney came. She had been at the drinks table for 2 hours. She had cried so hard her makeup was gone, and she came across that floor and dropped down in front of Claire's chair and said, "I'm the one who sent them over, Sid. I sent them over, Cole, Marcus, all of them. I organized it, Claire. I stood there and I said, somebody should ask her like you were a chore, Sydney. And I did it because I love you, and it's the worst thing I've ever done, Sydney." Claire took her hands. "Ask me what I'm reading." Sydney stopped. "What?" "Ask me," Claire said. "Right now. Ask me what I'm reading." Sydney Marsh wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "What are you reading?" she said, and Claire Whitmore laughed out loud. "Nothing," she said. "I haven't read a book in 14 months. I sit in the library, and I don't turn the pages, Sid. Somebody noticed that in September, and it wasn't you, and it wasn't me." Sydney looked up at the boy standing behind the chair. Him. Claire, Sydney's voice went to nothing. "I've known you since we were 4. "I know. He's known you since September." "I know," Claire said. "That's not a knife, Sid. That's just Tuesday. It's just what happened, and you can be mad about it or you can ask me the next question." Sydney sat on the floor of that ballroom in a $2,000 dress. "What's the next question?" she said. "Ask me what I want." And Sydney Marsh said, "Claire, what do you want?" Claire Whitmore looked at her oldest friend in the world. "Everything," she said. "I want all of it back, and I'm going to be insufferable about it, and I'm going to fall down in front of people, and I need you to stand there and let me." At 12:51, somebody's phone hit 11,000 views. Nobody in that room understood yet what had happened. They thought they'd had an evening. They thought it was a story they'd tell. 41 seconds of footage. Vertical. Shaky. Somebody's cousin standing near the third window who had started filming when Brandon Keller shoved the chair and had never stopped. By 4 in the morning, it was 900,000. By Tuesday, it was 40 million. And here is what people always got wrong about that video and what Claire Whitmore spent the next 10 years correcting in every interview she ever gave. It wasn't the standing. Everybody thought it was the standing. 40 million people watched a girl in a wheelchair stand up on a marble floor, and everybody cried at the standing. But the comment that got 200,000 likes, the top comment for 4 straight years, was written at 3:14 in the morning by a woman in Dayton, Ohio, and it said, "I'm not crying about the girl standing up. I'm crying because he knelt down first." At 1 in the morning, the last guests left the Whitmore estate. They did not leave the way they came. There is a particular silence to 400 people who have been shown themselves, and every one of them went out through those doors quieter than they came in. And Patricia Dean stopped in the doorway and looked back at a girl in a chair and said, "Claire, yes, Mrs. Dean. I'm not going to call you brave anymore." "Thank you." "I've been doing it for 2 years," Patricia Dean said, "since you were 16, and tonight I heard myself do it 11 seconds after you came through that door, and I have not been able to sit down since." "Mrs. Dean, what should I call you?" And Claire Whitmore said, "Claire, just Claire. Just say hello and then ask me something." Patricia Dean nodded. Then she said, "How's the reading coming?" And Claire Whitmore burst out laughing at 1 o'clock in the morning in an empty ballroom, and it was the sound of a person who had come back from somewhere. At 1:20, Ethan Brooks tried to leave. He got to the service door with his backpack. He'd changed. He was wearing the same jacket he'd worn up the front steps of Ravenswood Academy in September. "Hey," he stopped. Claire was in the doorway behind him. Her mother had pushed her because Claire's arms had nothing left in them, and Claire had said please, which was the first time in 2 years she'd let anybody touch that chair. "You were going to leave," she said. "The van's outside." "Ethan, I don't have a Claire. I don't have a thing to say here." He was still facing the door. "That's the truth. I'm not being humble. I've been dreading this part for 3 months." "What part?" "The part after." Claire looked at his back. "Turn around," she said. He turned around. "You said you'd bring the music." "I did." "That was the last line of the letter. You said, 'If you do, I'll bring the music.'" "Yeah." "So that's Thursday," Claire said. Ethan blinked. "What?" "Thursday," she said. "The annex, 9 o'clock. You're going to be there, and I'm going to be there, and you're going to bring the music. Claire." "I fell down 14 times tonight," Claire Whitmore said. 14, in front of 400 people, and I got up 13 of them. Her jaw was set. "Ethan, you don't get to hand me that letter and then walk out a service door. You started this. You looked at me. Nobody looks at me and then leaves." Ethan Brooks stood there with his backpack. "Thursday," he said. 9 o'clock. "Okay, say it." "I'll bring the music," Ethan Brooks said. 14 months later, Claire Whitmore walked into a courtroom in Boston with 2 canes and did not sit down. She was there for 11 minutes. She testified about a phrase. "No notable response, she said. It appears in my file 11 times over 11 weeks, and in each of those 11 weeks, a 17-year-old boy who mopped the floor reported the same finding and was told it was a spasm. I'm not here to put anybody in prison. I'm here to say that the sentence 'no notable response' was written by people who were not noticing. The bill that came out of it was 4 pages long, and everybody in Massachusetts called it Claire's Law, and Claire Whitmore hated that with her whole heart. "It's not Claire's Law," she said on television on a Tuesday to 11 million people. "Don't do that. Don't put my name on it. Put his mother's name on it. She's the one who figured it out, and she's been dead for 12 years, and nobody in this country knows what she looked like." They put Diane Brooks's name on it. 4 pages. It said that a patient's self-reported sensation had to be entered in the record verbatim. It said the words "phantom sensation" could not be used without a counter-signature. And it said this was the part that made 3 professional associations lose their minds, that any facility owned in majority by a patient's immediate family had to disclose it in writing to that patient. Richard Whitmore testified for that clause. He sat in a chair under an oath and said, "I bought the company because I loved her, and I want every man in this country who has money and a sick child to understand what I did. I didn't buy her better care. I bought a building where nobody could ever tell me the truth again." 2 years after the ball, Claire Whitmore danced. Not well. That's what she always said, and she was right, and she did not care. It was a recital for a rehabilitation program in Dorchester, and there were 40 people in the room, and she was 20 years old with a brace on her left leg and a partner who held her at the waist, and she made it through 90 seconds of a song she'd known since she was 7, and she fell twice. She got up both times. There is a video of that too. It has 11,000 views. Claire liked it better than the other one. 6 years after the ball, Ethan Brooks finished his degree. He'd done it slower than anybody wanted him to, because he'd worked the whole way through, because he'd never taken Bill Hargrove's money, not until his 3rd year, and then only after Hargrove sat across a table from him and said, "Son, it's Wednesday. It's been 100 Wednesdays. Now take the money." He took the money. He did not go into research. Everybody assumed he would. There were 3 universities that wanted him and a company in California that offered him a number with a comma in a place he'd never seen a comma. He went to work on a pediatric floor in Boston, 3rd floor, the one with the fish on the wall. Alan Reese was there the first day. He was 77 years old, and he had been coming in 2 days a week for 6 years, and he had a notebook of his own now, and on the cover in a shaky hand, he'd written the line from page 206. "You're late," Reese said. "Bus, sir." The old man handed him a chart. Then he took it back. "No, not that. That's what somebody else already thought." Ethan Brooks smiled. "Room 4, Reese said. 9-year-old, fell off a roof in August. Everybody's written him off, including him, and his mother is out of her mind, and I've got nothing." "Has anybody asked him what he wants?" "That's why you're here," Alan Reese said. 10 years after the ball, a woman named Karen Ellery stood up in a conference room in Chicago in front of 600 clinicians and said this. "In October of that year, I received a letter from a 17-year-old boy. It was 400 words long. It said a patient's left foot was moving in time with music. I sent him a form response. I want to tell you that I have thought about that letter every single working day for 10 years. She had to stop. "His mother taught me my job," Karen Ellery said. "I spoke at her funeral. I stood up and I said, Diane Brooks taught me to look at the patient and not the chart. And 11 years later, her own son wrote to me, and I did not look." Nobody in that room moved. "So here is what I want you to take home," she said. "It will not be a monster. When it happens to you, it will not be a monster. It will be a Tuesday, and you'll be tired, and there will be 40 letters, and one of them will be right." And here is the part that nobody outside those 2 families ever knew. 12 years after the ball on a Thursday in November, Claire Whitmore walked down an aisle. She used 1 cane. She'd fought about it for a month. Her mother had wanted 2. Her father had wanted the chair for the long part and the cane for the last 30 feet, and Claire had listened to all of it and then done exactly what she wanted, which by then everybody in her family had learned to expect. She fell once, about halfway. 400 people saw it, and not one single person moved because Eleanor Whitmore had stood up in the rehearsal the night before and said in front of the entire wedding party, "If she goes down, nobody helps her. She'll say when." Claire Whitmore knelt there on the carpet for 4 seconds. Then she got up, and she walked the rest of it, and she came up to the front, and the man waiting for her was 30 years old, with his mother's photograph in his breast pocket, and he was crying so hard he couldn't see. "Hi," she said. "Hi. You okay?" "No," Ethan Brooks said. And Claire Whitmore laughed and said, "Then don't be nice to me." They named the foundation after both mothers. Not after Claire, and not after Ethan, which is what everybody expected, and which they refused so flatly that the board actually had a meeting about it. It's called the Brooks-Whitmore Fund, and the two names on the plaque in the lobby are Diane and Eleanor, and underneath them there is one line, and it's the line from page 206, and it is the only thing written on that entire wall. They stopped trying when we stopped looking. There are 11,000 kids in that program now. It operates in 9 states. It has one rule, that it will not bend for money for donors or for anybody, and the rule is written into the intake paperwork in bold type on the first page. You will be asked what you want, out loud, by a human being, every single session. Not what you can do, not what the chart says, what you want. And every year on a cold night in December, Claire Brooks stands up in front of a room full of people who have been told the same sentence her family was told, and she says the same 9 words to open it, and everybody in that room says them back to her. They say, "Somebody in this room is not being looked at." Because the truth is very simple, and it took 400 people in a ballroom in Boston an entire night to learn it, and it took one boy with a serving tray about 4 seconds to know it. Cruelty is loud, but it is almost never the thing that breaks a person. What breaks a person is the room, the polite room, the kind room, the room full of good people with good reasons who look at a human being and see a chair and mean no harm and do all of it. 6 young men refused to dance with Claire Whitmore that night, and history did not remember one of their names. It remembered the one who knelt. Because in the end, the strongest person in any room is not the one everybody is looking at. It is the one who is looking.